Okay, quick update. Don't want to make this too long. So, and gosh, share my screen. Okay, I always have trouble with this. Okay. Okay, Prospect Bluff, also known as Fort Gadsden or Negro Fort in the Apalachicola Forest, about 30 miles from the town of Apalachicola, 70 miles from Tallahassee, Florida, about 150 miles east of Pensacola, out in the middle of nowhere, very desolate place. And in fact, if you go here, bring your own food and water. There's no provisions. Right now, the park's closed, but it's going to open real soon. So a few weeks ago, I went there with Dale Cox, who wrote the book, Fort at Prospect Bluff. Here it is. So I'll show that again. And Marty Morgan the other day called this the last battle of the War of 1812. We don't usually think of it that way because it's a year and a half after the Battle of New Orleans. But the events that led up to this would not have happened if it was not for the British and the events of the War of 1812. When the British lost at the Battle of New Orleans or left there, they were going to try again, plan B. So they went into Mobile Bay and took Fort Boyer. Then the next day heard that the Treaty of Ghent had been signed. So the war was over. And also as they were leaving the area, they had built this fort about 20 miles up from the mouth of the Apalachicola River, up from Apalachee Bay, and gave about 3,000 stands of arms. At least that's what the Americans recovered, to their Black and Native American allies. The Indian agent of the British, Colonel Edmund Nichols, he had built the fort and built another one, what's now the city of Chattahoochee. So there's actually two forts that they left, and it controls the river traffic. Their plan was to cut off the Americans. The Apalachicola went about 60 miles north and then split into the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers. It was the lifeblood of the Western Georgia economy that the cotton would come down the river and go to the market in Mobile or New Orleans. So if you had control of that, then you had control of the American economy. This was a British fort in Spanish Florida. Spain really couldn't do anything with it. The Americans had visited Pensacola a couple months before, I think it was in April 1816, and said that the garrison in Pensacola didn't have enough gunpowder to fire a salute. But from the evidence that Dale Cox has uncovered in the archives in Havana, the Spanish may have been a little more supportive of the fort than originally said. So Andrew Jackson, he got permission to destroy the fort from the Secretary of War, got the nod from it, sent up two American gunboats that were actually on a mission to supply Fort Scott in the confluence of the rivers in Georgia. And gunboat 149 and gunboat 154 came from New Orleans, and they came up the river, fired a hot shot, but more about that. But this from the Florida Historical Quarterly. It's also on the Florida Memory sketch of the fort done in the 1960s. You have on the left-hand side Fort Gadsden, which was the American fort that Jackson built in 1818 from the ruins of the fort. But the bigger outline is the American fort. And if you look on the LiDAR of the Water Management District, you can actually see the outline of the big fort and even the citadel in the middle. The citadel was a fortification within the fort, an 8-sided building built out of logs and earthworks. and it doesn't show the whole extent of the earthworks on here. There was a star formation fort built around that was uncovered with the archaeological work. The fort guarded, of course, overlooked the Apalachicola River. This was the highest point on the river from the mouth, Prospect Bluff. It's only about 10 feet high in elevation. So you're just kind of looking down from that point right here. To the right is going north up to Georgia. To the left, you see a bend in the river. That's going down south to Apalachee Bay. And from that southern corner, you can kind of see down that bend. As far as you can see, about 1.25 miles was where the American ship was on the morning of July 27th, 1816. It fired 4 or 5 shots to get the range. The fort was firing back. Now, the captain of the boat, he said it was about 5:30 in the morning, but it's actually 5:30 New Orleans time. He's going by the watch of Commodore Patterson in New Orleans. So it's about 6:30 actually. So it's daylight by this time. It's not dark. After the other shots they fired, he heats up a cannonball, fires another shot, and it is the one that destroyed the fort. Tell you more about that in a minute. Inside the middle of the fort, and this was before Hurricane Michael, you see those posts on the ground that marks off where the Citadel building was, the 8-sided Citadel, British flag in the center. And the shot fired off, you can see the pine trees in back. It ricocheted off a pine tree, went in the front entrance of the Citadel. The door was open. They had the gunpowder stored in there, blew it sky high. They could hear it as far away as Pensacola. And as emergency vehicles passed by, great timing, guys. Okay. But what happened is that tremendous explosion, and sorry, the resolution of the pain. I've had this image on my computer files for about 25 years, and back when we didn't have high resolution images. The explosion, one of the biggest explosions until the Civil War, killed most everybody inside the fort. And so anyway, in 2018, Hurricane Michael came through and devastated this area, knocked down about 380 something trees in the park. And it's just getting ready to be opened back up very soon. But because of that, they've had an opportunity to do some archaeological work, which is really good because archaeological work has not been done here in 60 years, since 1962. And from what they've gathered from the ground penetrating radar is that when it went in the door of the magazine, the opposite end of the building kind of exploded towards that end, which would be to the left of this photo, the northeast area, and just kind of blew it up in that direction. And even some of the work that they dug into found some of the logs and earthworks had actually been crushed because of the explosion. And the fortification had a moat around there. It actually filled up from the dirt from the building. And there's about 300 people inside the British fort. About 250 were killed instantly, and the Americans buried them in the moat around the fort, pretty much is what we believe, and left after 2 days. Took about 3,000 stands of arms. They gave most of that to the Creek Indian allies that had come down from Georgia, about 500 of them, which they kind of demanded some type of prize to capture. And there's 10 artillery pieces that the Navy took off with them. So this was really a naval battle. The Army was involved under Colonel Duncan Clinch, but he was pretty much useless. He couldn't even get near the fort, so he didn't really contribute anything. It was the hot shot from the gunboat that destroyed it. Here's some of the archaeological work. And I was here weekend before Easter, had special permission, went out there with Dale Cox and Dr. Brian Rutger. And this is some of the earthworks around the Citadel building in the background. The Citadel was there and had these points, like these star points around the building. And this is one of those points with the moat around it, which you can see plainly because it rained a couple days before we were out here. And if you go further back in the woods, they've cleared out, there's actually a ditch. And this was the moat around the main breastworks of the fort. And they had further earthworks beyond that. Here's Brian Rutger on the left, give you some scale of the ditch. And you can clearly see it as a ditch today. And it's filled in over the past 200 years. So it doesn't look as formidable, but back then it was about at least 6 feet deep back then. Some of the remains of the fort survived Hurricane Michael, was this beautiful oak tree they call the wedding oak. I like to think of it more as the tree of tears, the oak tree of tears, because it's very tragic here. And from what Dale Cox has looked at in the archives in Havana, he found a letter written by William Hamby. After the Americans left, William Hamby came up. He lived in what's now Blountstown. He was a Spanish citizen who worked for the Panton Leslie Trading Company out of Pensacola. He came up here after the Americans left. The Americans took about 30 prisoners with them. About 14 of them were determined to actually be runaway slaves. The others were determined not to be slaves of anyone, to be free blacks. And they were eventually let free, like Abraham, who was apparently he was one of the trained Marines as part of the fort. And so anyway, after the Americans left, William Hamby came up here and he dug out of the ground. He found about from what I'm seeing, it looks like about 24 survivors that were just too injured for the Americans didn't want them. They're maybe missing limbs or blinded, badly injured, and they're just left behind to die. And William Hamby dug them out, took them back to his place, tried to feed him what food he could have, wrote to the Spanish governor, said, you know, I need some food or supplies. And he watched them die one by one every day. One or two of them would die, succumb to their injuries. And he wrote the Spanish governor and said, never let the Americans get Florida of this horrible thing that they did and killed all these people. And even some of the survivors they just left that were buried in the dirt still from the explosion, 2 wounded and left behind. So gives you more perspective on some of the things that we haven't heard about before. Now the park is presently closed. You know, you can go there if you know about a tour or invite only. It's going to reopen. I estimate probably in a few months, might be on the more in October. The anniversary of the battle is July 27th, but it's horrendous out there in the summertime. The mosquitoes, the horse flies, the yellow flies, gnats just carry you off and eat you alive. First time I went there about 30 years ago, I left after 10 minutes. The bugs were just too great, and that was in September. Here's the interpretive kiosk. The exhibits are out of there right now. It's going to be more exhibits. The exhibits will be put back in there once it's ready to reopen. It's been repaired. There's a picnic pavilion behind that's been repaired. Its roof was crushed by the one of the trees that fell on it. There's no water and electricity out there. They did have a well, but the well pump was destroyed by a tree that fell on it. And so So that's why I say if you go out there, bring your own food and water and provisions. They do have a pit toilet. I didn't go in there because it's like kind of scary. But I think they're also looking for a volunteer, like a caretaker volunteer to live out there. There's RV hookups that they can hook them up with as soon as they get the water and well pump running again. So anyway, that's what the situation is right now at Prospect Bluff, also known as Fort Gadsden and Negro Fort on the Apalachicola. And I'll put Marty Morgan's video, I think, in the notes and probably on the tail end. This is Dale Cox's book, The Fort at Prospect Bluff. You can get it from his website, 2 Egg TV, and also on Amazon. 400 pages. It's a tough read, but it's major research that's been done that we haven't read anywhere else. So hope you enjoy the video, and we'll talk later.